Next up, we're going to have a panel looking at AI. And if I could ask my panelists to come and join us on the stage. The title of this panel is AI, a tool US industrial biomanufacturing cannot ignore. We have Cees van Dok, who's product manager and UX design, Prosyn.ai at the Process Design Center. Dr. Will Cow, who's co-founder and CEO of Pando Bioscience. Apostolos Zournas, postdoctoral researcher at Agile BioFoundry Berkeley Lab. And Zachary Karl, who's vice president of business development at eXoZymes. So, panelists, please join me on stage. Can I have a round of applause for our panelists, please? Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us here this afternoon. If we could start things off, I think we should sort of define our terms a little bit. What do we mean by AI? LLMs, ChatGPT, or something more? How do we define AI in this context? Cees, let's get your thoughts.
That's an easy question to start with. First of all, thanks for being here, Leo, and inviting us over. I don't think so. So AI has been very long in the making. But of course, ChatGPT, large language models, generative AI had been an enormous catalyst and made AI, available to the general public. And I think that has caused a lot of momentum, obviously. I think ChatGPT had like 100 million users in the first 2 months, which is unprecedented for any software product. But AI dates back way longer. I think like in the 70s and 80s, the early AI products already emerged. Expert systems was one of the first buzzwords. Neural networking, then we got like big data, natural language processing, deep learning, like every period in time, I guess, had its own manifestation of what AI is about. But also, again, for the general public, there have been a couple of very high visible milestones, right? I think everyone remembers IBM Deep Blue beating Kasparov at chess in '97, which was a brute force search application, basically beating the best human chess player. The DARPA challenges in 2005 and 06, trying to get self-driving cars off the road. I think the first version of DARPA in Phoenix, none of the cars or reached the finish line, but a year later there were already 2 who were able to do that. So development has been going fast, and I think the other notable event was in 2016 when AlphaGo, another deep learning neural network product, beat the best human player at Go, which was supposed to be the hardest game for a computer to win at. And human-like creativity was at that point one of the most remarkable outcomes of that software. So there's been a long history in AI.
Yeah, and I know, given the title, this is, potentially how AI is applied to biomanufacturing specifically. And so when I think of AI in biomanufacturing, it goes beyond large language models, as Cees was pointing out, right? LLMs are still a very important part of the picture. In what I'm doing at eXoZymes, the models used in enzyme engineering are your protein language models or your graph neural networks, right? But the real power comes from when you can, take these general models and fine-tune them with, high-quality, labeled experimental data, right? That's what allows you to be able to make predictions, in our case, of enzyme solubility, stability, and, activity. And so, in our space, AI is not just about language. It's about the design, the prediction, and the development of across enzyme engineering, pathway modeling, and process development, if you will. So kind of all 3 of those.
Can I quickly add one point? Yeah, so when we were talking about AI, at least in our setting, it's more like a broader set of machine learning or generative AI tools, maybe building for enzyme engineering, maybe for fermentation, but it doesn't mean we're not gonna use the LLM. Like for example, in my company, we try to use like ChatGPT open source model to try to learn from public or patent data, right, using text search, and then extract those data, feed back to our built AI, and learn something so that we can avoid infringing the patent. So just try to say like there are a lot of existing tools, and as a startup, we try to embrace using them as well.
Okay, well we'll come to Apostolos now actually, because we sort of, obviously AI means a lot of different things to different people. So let's get into some specifics. If you can talk about, maybe introduce what you're doing and give us some specific examples of how AI is currently being applied and improving the world.
Yeah, so to follow up on what everyone else said, what we're doing at Berkeley Lab is we're essentially using algorithms that operate under very small data because biological data is so expensive to generate, and we're trying to essentially use a combination of machine learning, design of experiment techniques, and active learning within the design, build, test, learn cycle paradigm, where we can do development as fast as cheaply as possible. And there are a bunch of different applications. One, we have done some strain engineering for isoprenyl production. We have done media optimization for some red pigment production. We're doing some multi-scale process optimization. So, and all of this is being done with very rudimentary, sort of old school AI and machine learning, where we're getting very few data points and we're trying to improve the process as much as possible with the focus on reproducibility. This is the bottom line over there, which I think Zachary can also attest to with high throughput experimentation.
Fantastic. Zach, tell us a little bit about what you're doing at eXoZymes then.
Yeah, so eXoZymes on all your lanyards there. So at eXoZymes, we're building self-free biomanufacturing platform using what we consider to be engineered eXoZymes, or basically enzymes or enzyme cascades that are designed to function outside of living cells, right? And that allows us to remove a lot of the usual bottlenecks of cell viability, product toxicity, and competing metabolic pathways, and really operate with more precision control and I would say scalability. It's a very linear scalability model with enzymes, and AI is central to how we accomplish this, right? And so a specific example I can point to is just around SynBioBeta, we announced our formation of NCTx, which the focus of that is to produce NCT, N-trans-cathyltyramine. It's a mouthful. But in that instance, we used AI-guided enzyme selection and cascade optimization in order to reach gram-scale, high-purity production far more quickly and efficiently than what would have been possible with the traditional trial and error cycles, right? And so by being able to predict which enzymes would be most likely to succeed, which I know Pando's doing a lot of, and modeling the process conditions, AI really allowed us to reduce the experimental burden and accelerate development. We went from ideation to that gram-scale proof of concept within 6 weeks. So,
how does that compare with what would have been done before in terms of cost and speed?
In terms of like exacts, it's hard to say, but having been at kind of cell-based companies and having done cell-free in the past, it's incredibly more. It's way faster and way cheaper than previously possible. The DBTL cycles alone are just very, very quick. It's weeks. It's weeks for the DBTL cycles in this field because of AI.
Will, you're also doing enzymes, things with enzymes. How does what you're doing differ from Zach?
Yeah, so we are an AI enzyme discovery and engineering platform. So first of all, we curated a very large database publicly and internally, so that gave us a lot of enzyme candidates to screen from. And we also developed an internal high throughput screening platform to verify like millions of AI generated genotypes within a week. So that is like something common between eXoZymes and us is we do large screening, we believe in the data. But in terms of, like, I can give a very specific example. For example, we were making a small molecule, not able to disclose what it is, but traditionally it's using 17 chemical steps. So our customer wanted to lower the price, the cost. So what we're doing is go to our very large database and ask AI, what kind of chemical steps can I use an enzyme to replace? And AI will, of course, spit out thousands of candidates to replace different steps. But eventually, we find one to replace 11 chemical steps. That means you just do one enzymatic, 6 chemical step, you make the final molecule. So that lowered the cost significantly. So we definitely see a lot of the advantages in terms of the speed of the design, and when you're adding the human expertise, looking at, why that design makes sense, and then you coupled with very large amount of screening and data input, then you fine-tuning the model, everything become very fast and cheap.
Fantastic. Cees, tell us, we had enzymes. I'm assuming you've got something to do with process design.
Yeah, exactly. So our expertise and strength is much more in the end-to-end process design and in biomanufacturing. That often comes down to in the downstream purification process. We are a 20-people company from the Netherlands. We've been around for about 40 years. And we do a kind of half commercial projects and half projects in the shared research space. And we have a foundational tool, a proprietary tool that we use ourselves, which is our AI system, which is a rule-based AI system. As I mentioned before, like started back in the 80s, 90s, and we've kept on developing it since. And we use our software to help us make conceptual process decision. So if you're looking for what is the ideal separation process to purify a certain product out of a mixture, and there's a combination of technologies possible, the AI helps us make the right choice through a very elaborate Q&A process. So in the basis, there's a large database with component properties and all sorts of thermodynamic principles. And then the software is based off a large knowledge base of knowledge, which is turned into heuristics, into rules. And by following the steps of those rules, you get to a certain outcome. And that can be a certain, like the applicability of a centrifuge or a membrane or any kind of separation technology that for that piece of the process is critical. It works a bit like a medical diagnosis system. That is maybe the best analogy to think about, like when you come with a certain disease to the doctor and the doctor starts asking questions to narrow down what the potential probability of a certain of your symptoms are. That is a very similar way to how our rule-based system works. And a couple of big advantages about the rule-based system, which we probably get later at as well. But I wanted to point out something that Will also mentioned, like we've been augmenting our rule-based traditional expert system with large language models lately to form some form of a hybrid. So you take the output of the rule-based system, turn that into a prompt that you feed to LLM systems in order to get like a different lens on the same kind of problem, and you bring the output of that back into your rule-based system in order to find outliers or to find methodologies that you wouldn't think of in the first place. So in that sense, it even enhances the creativity in conceptual process design.
Have you got any specific case studies that you can tell us about that have sort of where you've shown significantly reduced development timelines?
We have hundreds. Like we literally do like 20 projects a year. But to mention maybe one, there's a Dutch biochemical company named Avantium, which is among others producing polyethylene furanate, which is a PEF as a replacement for PET. And we helped Avantium, for example, to purify their original solvent, which is hydrochloride acid, and purify it to almost 100%, so it could be reused through a very clever combination of columns. And we also found quite a clever way to get separate formic acid and water out of the pipeline later down in the process, again with much less energy used than originally. So we're really looking at efficiency gains in energy usage, into getting to your end result with fewer equipment or with cheaper equipment. And those are examples that could not have happened without the use of our software.
One of the speakers yesterday mentioned the potential of AI to sort of revisit previously failed business ideas, because maybe those business ideas failed because we didn't have the capacity or the bandwidth to reach the goals that we wanted to reach in a timely fashion. Maybe the money ran out before we could get there. AI has the potential, obviously, to speed up reaching those conclusions. Any thoughts on whether that is something that people could go back and look at previously failed ideas and businesses and say, maybe with AI we could get these things running?
I have one, not necessarily failed case. So one type of enzyme our company developing is DNA RNA modifying enzyme. So kind of like the polymerases, right? Decades of work. So they're very good ones. Some of them have a temperature limit. So we're asking the question, okay, why after decades, those polymers are good, but they're still sailings and there's still a lot of improvement rooms? Can we use all the knowledge that accumulated decades on the patent literature and then using AI to make new innovation? And that's sort of like exactly what we're doing. Like we have an enzyme called 529 used for rolling circle amplification. Like your single cell whole genome sequencing company, this is a must-have, and sometimes DNA production also need this high fidelity. And we made this enzyme working at a very high temperature with specific primers or hexamers, and have very high processivity and fidelity. I think not necessarily for biomanufacturing, but that's a good case for, go back to the history and find something new.
Any other thoughts on that?
I mean, in terms of cell-free technologies, it's not so much, as Will was pointing out, going back and trying to, resurface something or make something successful in the past. I think it's really enabled this industry specifically to actually, have a future. It's actually commercially viable. The costs have come down so significantly. The timelines have come down so significantly. It's actually allowed this industry to be very competitive in the biotech space.
Absolutely. I mean, that was a question that I sort of was potentially going to skip over, but maybe we'll get to it, which is how is AI helping to achieve cost parity in these bio-based products compared with traditional manufacturing methods, and what metrics should the industry focus on to measure this progress? Any thoughts? I mean, you've mentioned that sort of, you're saying AI, it could be the thing, the tool that helps us compete.
Yeah. So, there's a lot of value in AI. It's obviously overhyped a little bit, but there's a lot of value in AI, but only if it's applied in the right way, right? And so, from what I've seen I'm a business guy, so what I've seen coming out of the lab is that, the largest gains come when, strong experimental data sets are paired with models that are carefully built and refined for the specific biological challenge at hand, right? We've seen that at eXoZymes with what I mentioned before with the enzyme selection and then the optimization, but we're very careful not to overhype AI and treat it as some magical shortcut. Truly the metrics, or the most important metrics, I think, remain the practical ones, right? It's the cost of goods, it's the cycle times to proof of concept, and sustainability factors such as energy and solvent intensity.
Obviously, this conference is focusing on US industrial biomanufacturing, but I'd like to get some comparisons between what's happening here and what's happening in maybe Europe and China. So drawing on your experiences, what are some standout advances in AI coming out of Europe or Asia compared to developments in the US?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's AI specific, but I think what's strong in Europe is the research culture and the collaboration among all the European countries, driven by a European Commission with a very clear longer-term vision and goals around solving some of the bigger societal challenges. And the European Commission creates a framework for that infrastructure and, not unimportantly, also funding to help that forward. So we see a lot of, and actually we're involved like for half of our projects in consortia of many different companies across Europe that bring complementary knowledge together in order to drive a certain domain forward. And that happens in biomanufacturing, but also in AI for biomanufacturing. And that's, I think that's something quite unique for our continent, and it's probably also stemming from the fact that we're so many small separated countries with very different culture that there's a need to do that. But it's working out well, and the progress being made there is quite interesting. Another angle to this is becoming less dependent also from an AI infrastructure on the other parts of the world, like obviously the tech-heavy main players is all happening in the US, and becoming less dependent on that is one of the bigger challenges, I think, for the EU space. I think all the AI big shots are either in China or in the US. We finally have a French company, Mistral, that is trying to make some waves in the EU as well. But that really remains, I think, a crucial bottleneck for our continent.
I would say, having spoken to, we have some really brilliant enzyme engineers at eXoZymes, from Max Planck, from the Michael Jewett Lab, and things like that. And they're always raving about how particularly strong Europe is in enzyme engineering, right? You have DeepMind's AlphaFold, which has really transformed the sequence to structure prediction realm of things, and then like Cradle, which is really leading the way in silico enzyme design. When I think of Asia, it always seems like they're really pushing ahead in the automation and robotics side of things, and generating just almost absurd, amounts of data, just very large-scale data sets that feed into machine learning at a rate that's really hard to match, elsewhere in the world, just because of those robotics and that automation. But I think the U.S. is strong at maybe combining AI expertise with real cutting-edge biology, and in turn, I think that allows us to move maybe quicker than the other regions from innovation to commercialization.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to share a case happening in China. So I happen to have a customer located in China. So my first feeling is just fast. In terms of they signing a contract, or they know, oh, you have an AI, right? Once they trust you, they don't even want to hear like, how did you do it? They don't want to have a biweekly meeting. How do you design this? They'll just give me my enzyme, And then once you have the enzyme, they can go from lab scale to the meat scale to those 1,000-liter fermenter within a month. And once you have the enzyme, they do things very dirty and quick. For example, we designed the enzyme to made in a cell lysate format to trigger some biocatalysis process. It's actually making nicotine. But they just put the whole cell, frozen in a bucket, like literally the Home Depot bucket, and then dump it in the reactor, and then observe the conversion rate, the titer. And to me, it was like, wow. And then they got the result, and then, they don't want to even measure it, validate it in the lab scale. They just want to see how it works in the reactor. That's my biggest impression. Versus my European or US customer, generally building the trust is super, super tough and hard. But once you build it, they really trust you, right? They want to have bi-weekly meeting very early on to know what exact AI you are using, right? How are you sure that's real? How am I sure later on the enzyme I'm going to put in my reactor works? So that's the biggest difference I see.
I think in contrast to what Cees was saying before, the fact that the US is essentially so much more homogeneous than what Europe is, this enables sort of cross-country, within the country collaboration from different institutions quite a bit more. And for example, I'm going to plug the ABF over here, the Agile BioFoundry, where there are a bunch of different national labs that have different missions and different goals and different expertise, and they all came together to build this organization to enable biomanufacturing in the US. And some part of this is AI, some part of is training engineering, but there's a lot of exchange between all of these disciplines. And this is made easy because of the sort of more central structure and federal organization that comes with being just a huge country rather than an organization of more countries. Also, the other part that the US does a lot, probably better than anywhere else, is the actual AI development. Like most of the cutting edge AI and LLMs and diffusion models are here. So this also, and the technology, NVIDIA, AMD, like being so much centralized in the US, makes it a lot easier for the development and usage of these tools.
Absolutely. Something that you raised, the over-reliance on AI, you sort of touched on it there a little bit. How do you get your customers to trust you if it's produced by the AI? And in the future, if we are getting over-reliant on AI, how do we know, and if the AI is making errors, and it's beyond our understanding, the AI's done it, how do we validate those results? How do we go in and fix those things, and how do we get our customers to trust us? Is that a risk of AI?
For sure. I think that's why being able to generate data, valid data, is super important. So there are right now a lot of companies just making in silico design, right? Which is not bad, but I truly believe like expert views are still important. So giving a case, we try to improve an enzyme to increase the titer. So AI made a recommendation on a hotspot chain, like several mutations. We take a look by human eyes, look at the structure, AlphaFold, right? And then it was like, you know what is so far away from the active site? Maybe it's an allosteric type of mutation, who knows? So our strategy is, we can do large screening. Why don't we put what AI said, thinking the high score, into the test set? However, we also put a lot of the things that we think it's right. So it's basically like a down sampling. So you diversify the risk, and then you let the screening result tell the story, right? And the truth is actually the allosteric mutation made by AI is very good. Then we start to think, oh, interesting, why is that the case, right? Then you can start to develop some mechanistic understanding of it. Yeah, and of course, there are some cases AI made a very high score prediction and is really bad. That happens as well. So that's why you have to diversify.
Maybe I can chime in, because in our case, building a plant, even a pilot plant, in order to start measuring is often impossible when you're in the conceptual design phase. And that is actually where the beauty of a rule-based AI comes in, because all the recommendations or the technology that we find in the as an end result, or the probability thereof, we can always backtrace it through the heuristics and the rules that were applied in order to derive to that conclusion. So you can always find the original scientific papers or the expert view that went in that determined that particular rule, why that particular technology was chosen. And our customers demand that, right? They want proof that the proposals that you make are actually rooted in reality and that it's not something coming out of a black box. So that's why a rule-based expert system still has, I think, a lot of potential, even in this fast-moving bio world where you can measure things soon at the pilot level, but on the downstream purification process, it's much more complex as a lot more technology comes into play.
And just to echo kind of what they both said, I think one of the greater risks of AI is treating it as a black box, right? Scientific intuition can truly be lost if we stop questioning the output, right? And just start trusting it. And so, we can avoid this by, I think Will said earlier, keeping a human in the loop, by validating any type of prediction with some sort of assay. And as Cees was saying, maintain, full data lineages and reproducibility records, right? And so, for the customer, I think that ensures that accountability is never lost. And as Cees said, any AI-driven result is really anchored in experimental proof.
But won't there come a day when keeping a human in the loop is just slowing things down?
I can't imagine. I don't think so. To me, AI is just another tool in the toolbox. It's a very sexy tool and a great one. It's like having a new power tool in your shop. But in the end, I think it's the knowledge of the human that needs to make trade-offs and calls and interpret the data and make a final recommendation in conclusion.
Fantastic. Okay, well, looking ahead, emerging AI technologies or trends, what do you foresee transforming the biomanufacturing landscape in the next, say, 5 to 10 years? In our last few couple of minutes.
Yeah. So this, it's a really interesting question because this can kind of be a touchy subject in this space. I've had this conversation with many colleagues in many different industries, and the conversation typically veers towards something along the lines of replacement of a workforce or part of a workforce, right? But I have a different take on it. From my point of view, I feel that we have a significant opportunity to really create a system where scientists are supported by AI-enabled tools that accelerate decision-making, free them up from repetitive work, and allow them to focus on the design, the strategy, and the interpretation of those results. And so, like I said, whenever anybody talks about 5-10 years in the future and replacing, I don't think AI is going to replace the workforce or the scientists, kind of in this space, doing the things. I think it's just going to amplify what they can do.
Apostolos?
I think probably one of the most important things that's going to happen is full integration and the closed-loop systems with AI and robotics. So essentially, you ask a system to do something, and it sort of does a few steps that you can oversee, and, like as Zach said, sort of freeing up scientists from repetitive work, pipetting 800 times, increasing throughput, and this will enable process development and optimization and strain engineering to go so much faster that things that would now take months or years would come down to weeks. And then this will, of course, reveal new bottlenecks in bringing things to market because things will become way more competitive and so on. So I think what's going to happen is the landscape is going to change a lot, but because of a huge increase in productivity and utilization of robotic systems.
Yeah, I want to add something on top of that. I think the first one is how we treat data, right? Like, for example, if you look at scale AI, we are all in biology. We know when we look at the paper, you try to replicate it, generally it wouldn't work, right? Because before we don't think in a way that something can learn from this massive data. And now I think everybody more care about metadata. What kind of temperature or environment or situations coupled with that data? So I think that would change the way how we record and labeling data. That's number one. Number two, I think a little bit touch on Leo's previous question is something failed before or we didn't think we have that capability. I think with AI, there's a lot more we can do. Like one thing we're doing supported by DARPA is if I want to make a very precious, final, complicated molecule, natural product, can I, based on this massive database, chemical database, can I think of a new way of synthesizing this natural product using maybe new enzyme or new reagent, new formulation, vice versa? Those I think AI can, before we don't have a tool of that to planning the route, but now we have a way.
In case, 30 seconds.
Well, I find it very hard. Like I think the predictions that we're talking about here are very much extending what we know today. And I have no 8-ball. I would be not surprised that something miracle-like is going to happen in another 4 or 5 years that none of us could have foreseen.
Fantastic. Well, we'll leave it on that cliffhanger there and look forward to seeing how it all pans out. But thank you very much to an expert panel there.